Morning, afternoon, evening. Distracted.
Ah, getting nerves already.
Uh,
That didn't take long.
Trying to think of too much at once, and yeah, yeah. My head tries to run at a. I think my head parallel processes a lot in the background that I'm not aware of, and that takes away from the front process, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit like that too. It's
Yeah,
like being a multi-threaded person, and you're sitting in the first core going, "Huh, okay, that happened. Wasn't expecting that."
yeah. Every now and again, a no, you're doing this wrong comes in from the back, and it's like what? And if you ignore those, then they just sort of stop functioning and sit there in a huff instead. Personality fragments, you could say.
Yeah, that goes back to our what was it, Council of Me that we called?
Yeah, Congress of the Self.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
like that. That's good. I like Congress of the South.
yeah.
Oh well, what's been going on in your world this week?
I went ice skating, trying to get out more and um, trying to work out social interaction with strangers. And I realized that I should probably start with guys because that's easier. But it's like, as fellow humans, there's some compatibility with approaching girls. And
Yeah, I can see that. You got to get your confidence up in social skills, I suppose.
yeah, and trying
Things take
to,
time.
yeah, working out what the. It's funny, something I realized while listening to the radio, which may be to do with other things I've learnt and studied in terms of how my mind represents it to me. But when you're listening to a song, you can often get the emotional tone of the song. What was it? Unstoppable by Sia is one that's sort of a, yeah, a good example of the type that it's a song that can generate a particular flavor of emotional reaction, or We Will Rock You, or Freebird, I think, does that for a lot of people. Like, different songs will work for different people, but different songs have a certain emotional flavor. And within the realm of my mind, while driving, I was like, okay, this is me as a whole. Let's just hold what does the emotional flavor of this song look like? And there was a slightly rocky song, and that was. No, I can't remember what that one was. There was a Spice Girls one, I think, that came on. Tell me what you want, what you really, really want one. And the imagery of the flavor of that song, to mix sensory metaphors, was sweet and sharp, like thorns covered in sugar. Was it that one or a different one? But the idea being that um, like the lovers come and go, but friendship lasts forever type idea that's expressed in that song. It's like sweet and said in a happy and friendly way, but it's like sharp, and just the imagery of like licking a stiletto knife came to mind. Of that's
And
probably
it's that
getting
sort of brutal feminine.
yeah, yeah. The what was it? Oh no, there was another one too that had a similar flavor. It was I'd heard some videos talking about how a lot of the way people interact in relationships is due to trauma in the sense of an unmet need, emotional need during childhood, not a particularly traumatic experience. But uh, there are the people who are, what would you call it? Avoidant attachment style. So when they feel emotionally close to someone, they'll push them away they because of it's a coping strategy of they don't think that the intimacy and the emotional connection will stay, so they push it away as a self-protective measure because they think that if they let it in, they'll just get hurt. And
Yeah, they see the connection as vulnerability.
yeah, And then the opposite side of that, so often men will have that one, typically. I have the opposite. But then women will have the clingy side where it's like, I need you, I need to be with you all the time, I need to know everything about you, and so on. Um, because they need to hang on to that emotional closeness because they feel desperately that they need it. And you'll often find the clingy and avoidance sort of with each other because two clingies just sort of gets overwhelming. Two avoidance just sort of drift apart, but a clingy and an avoidance um, dysfunctionally work. And the song was about uh, her singing at him that now I'm gone and you fall apart and all those words you said to hurt me. And I was just seeing this from the perspective of that uh, coping strategy attachment styles of, okay, well, he was avoidant and pushing her away as his coping strategy, and she, I don't know, it was sung from her perspective, she was quite possibly the clingy one. Um, and then she found someone better, at least in her eyes, and then he fell apart as soon as she left, and it was sung as a sort of victory song of, well, you were so mean to me, and now I'm gone, and ha ha on you. But it's like, this is toxic for both of you. There's nothing good about this situation. Sure you were both hurting each other at different times of the system, but of the relationship, but it's not good. And
Did,
yeah, so I'm
okay, I can break that apart, but I
mm,
also have a question about it.
yep.
Did you expect the sexualized pop songs to be portraying a healthy message?
No, I expect them to be portraying things that people experience. And almost often dysfunctional versions of that because they tend to be the most emotive. Um, there are some that portray better versions, certainly. Would it be songs that talk about wanting to commit and wanting to be there? What was it the one that comes to mind is I don't know the name of the song. There are lots of songs I know by a few lyrics, but not the name of it. But the "I'll Be Your Hero, Baby" that
Mm.
that comes to mind as the more positive manifestation. Or "I Would Walk 1,000 miles for you," although that might be slightly more I'll do anything for you, even if it sort of
I think,
goes by what would be nominal boundaries, but or grenade where I'd throw myself on a
yeah,
grenade for you. Yeah, that's a bit too far.
that one always made me uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Okay, I think the point that I was getting at with that is I think this shows how way more cynical, perhaps conspiratorial I am than you.
Hmm.
Because for my mind, a most majority of popular music, the radio, are intentionally harmful and placed there intentionally.
Hmm.
I don't see them as, a messed up artist expressing their messed up world or their messed up worldview, but rather as, okay, I do see it's that, but I also think that it's those ones are chosen and promoted by the institutional powers who work in that space
Hmm.
to manipulate an audience, which shows my conspiratorial side. But I also think you touched on a really important point, which is that not all dysfunctional relationships are unstable.
Hmm.
You can have a really stable relationship that is really bad. And I think it's worth, a lot of people will think that if it's not right, then it'll just fall apart. And a lot of relationships can be, even to the point of abusive, but still stable.
Hmm.
So it's something you got to be really careful to look out for, and knowing your style, your attachment style, and how that might be taken advantage of is
Hmm.
a very good defense knowledge for most people.
Yeah. And so the point I started at, to circle back, is that what I was playing with was listening to songs, and rather than just feeling the emotional tone of the songs, it's like, okay, here is the emotional tone of the songs. Like, instead of uh, going into a kitchen and just being enveloped in the smell of the cooking, it's like, okay, let me take one sniff of it. Okay, let's try that one. Okay, and you can say, okay, here is an emotional tone. Here is another one. Here is another one I've experienced somewhere else. And then, okay, let me see if at other times I could bring forth that emotional tone from memory uh, for usefulness. And the strength that I'm trying to develop in myself, which stumbling blindly and feeling in the dark, trying to work out what I need to develop in myself to become a more fully rounded human. At the moment, that's the strength to say no, and in the sense of I will not be moved from this place unless I choose to move myself. And that's not saying that I'm wanting to be utterly immovable, but
You want to
only
be less manipulatable by your emotions.
emotions and others. Yes, I'll hear the scenario being I'll hear something that I disagree with and I won't agree with it in a sort of non-committal way, or I'll have the strength to say I disagree with that, even if I'm concerned of some level of social rejection, which is particularly likely in um, talking to attractive women. And I'm almost expecting that, or at least I feel like I'll need to develop the ability, and a lot of it's from what you've said, to discern that a woman might not be a good choice even if she's attracted to me. So I'm hoping that I'll get to the point where I can become sufficiently attractive to be able to say no. This is a half formed
It,
thing.
okay, I see what you're driving at.
Mm.
It's interesting that you would say that you would need to become attractive enough to be the one who says no.
There's unprocessed stuff behind that, probably, or unarticulated.
Yeah, why, even if you're speaking to a woman who is more attractive than you in the general sense, why is your criteria still not more important to you than hers?
I guess it's wanting to have more than one option, not at once, but over a period of time.
Sorry, I don't see how that lands with my question. Perhaps I missed something.
Um, Being able to say no requires the assumption that there will be another chance. And having had precisely one relationship or one girl interested in me in my life, from an emotional
Right.
memory
So
perspective,
it's a worldview perspective then.
yeah.
So you're struggling with the right. So when you were saying that you need to become attractive enough to say no, what you're meaning is that you need to see yourself in a light that won't make you desperate, so that you can act judiciously,
Prudently, judiciously, discerningly.
discerning. Yes,
Hmm.
that's probably the word. Your criteria, or the partner you are looking for, is your priority when speaking to a woman. Not her criteria, not meeting them, not molding yourself to meet it, surely, but your criteria.
Hmm.
You're not there to impress her and get her to say yes. You're there to see if you need to say no to her.
I'm trying to square that with Hmm. The concept that I think Peterson said it, among others, but that women are the primary gatekeepers to relationships, to
Yes,
paraphrase.
they are more likely to say no. That's all that means.
Hmm.
Is that a man is likely to say yes to a majority of women, whereas a woman is likely to say no to a majority of men.
Hmm.
They're more selective, but that just because most men are desperate or will act impulsively doesn't mean that that's the criteria or the game even that you're playing. Because you're not looking for a one night stand.
Hmm. Yeah,
You're looking
the
for a wife, effectively.
yeah, the strategy, for want of a better term, is well,
Yeah, I can tell you're not too comfortable with that term.
yeah, there's what is it? What's the phrasing? There are, broadly speaking, the short term and the long term strategy. The short term one, if you're if you ask men whether they would want to sleep, whether they would be happy to sleep with a woman once in studies where they hire some normal college students or such, and say, would you sleep with a woman in this photo? In a one night stand sense, the vast majority will say yes. It's like, is she adult and not hideous? But would you marry this woman to be with for the rest of your life? And it's much more constrained. And women, it's much more constrained to start with because of the risk of pregnancy, basically, and all the follow ons from that. So they're the brain structures that they have, they're evolutionarily programmed to only have that second strategy, and then our modern culture saying that, oh, you can sleep around as much as you want and that's empowering, and it's like, no, that's not empowering for men or women. It's like there's a subset of men who go for the short-term strategy and always would, but that doesn't
Work
mean,
out very well for them.
in a genetic propagation sense, it's like there is a an element of success there,
Yeah,
but
but this is the problem, is that they don't. People who do that, the men in the world who are doing that, they don't propagate.
is that in today's culture or over
Yes,
historical timescales?
today's culture. Yeah,
Ah, okay, yeah.
yeah. I imagine that the difference between those two categories of short term, long term for women is very small.
Mm,
Perhaps no difference at all. It would strike me as logical that for a woman, the I would sleep with him as a one night stand would be in the same category as I would marry him because it's like a wild Hail Mary attempt to capture him.
mm. Yeah, yeah.
Whereas for a man, it's like there is no cost,
Mm.
none to having that kind of activity.
If we're speaking on an animalistic level, yes. On a
Yeah, evolutionary cost.
on a
That's
conscious
right.
level, things get much more complicated in a cultural level.
Yes, yes, there are in reality serious costs, particularly to culture.
Mm.
But well, we're finding that one out.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. The the friend who I was seeing today, who I mentioned to you before we started recording, um, he I'd say has similar social awkwardness levels to me, and his girlfriend, what was it? There was a party. She saw him, grabbed him, and never left the house. As in, she just sort of moved in, and it's they've been working through both external and internal issues in terms of obstacles or challenges, external into the relationship, and Yeah, sticking it out for the long term.
If they manage to make it work, that's impressive.
Mm.
It's somewhat similar to what happened to me, but
Mm.
not exactly.
Yeah, similar in some aspects of the pattern, different in kind.
Yeah, there was a lot of behavior that I did up front that changed that
Mm.
specific example. But I know men who have had that happen to them and had it not work out very well.
Mm.
I would say as a
Hello.
general rule of thumb, or even myself, a previous partner,
Ah, yeah.
didn't go well. Um, I was a teenager, so it doesn't really count. But I certainly learnt the pattern from her.
Mm.
Generally, I would say as advice for all young men, if she comes on to you, or do, no, it's not even that. It's what she said. Just grabs you and says you, and then that's it. It's not the one you want,
Mm.
and advise you to get the hell away from her as fast as possible.
Mm.
You want one who is, well, who says no.
I think
That's the one you want.
as with all patterns, it's a general rule and there are exceptions. But yeah, that the idea that saying no is a green flag
Mm.
is it makes some levels of sense to me, but it's also a little bit difficult to process right
Modern
through.
culture, modern culture's tried to hammer that one pretty hard, for obvious reasons, but
Hmm.
I think gone a little far. No, it's something I picked up from one of Peterson's lectures that really struck me to the core is that one, it's difficult for women to say no because they're agreeable, but also, how else is a woman going to indicate her value to you?
Hmm.
What, more expensive clothes or more revealing, or and that gets to horseshoeing around to not very valuable pretty quickly. But if you approach her and she's like, no, but you can tell there's a hint of keep trying. A no, there's a hard no, which is a no, never, and that's okay, it's done. But then there's the not yet, no. And it's uncomfortable because it is a really grey area in our culture. It's another one of these things that we're just not mature enough to talk about, which is why comedians have a good go at this all the time, which is no, stop it, is not the same when it's read out in a court deposition. No, stop it. Not
Yeah.
the same thing. I don't remember where I heard this, but it was someone making fun of James Bond's strategy. And it really annoyed me at the time, but I can kind of see how there's truth in it, which is uncomfortable.
Hmm.
Which is 50 no's and a yes is still a yes.
Hmm.
Playing hard to get indicates value on their part. If you come straight out and say, I like you, I want to date you, and they say yes, they're not, they're probably not the one you want. And you're not going to perceive them as something that you had to, you know, win to be valued. If it was easy, not valuable.
I'm just wondering whether um, how agreeableness factors into that, because it feels like a disagreeable in the personality sense, not in the necessarily being good or bad or confrontational or anything, although there's associations there, but in the sense of uh, I'm more agreeable than you, and yeah, this isn't a fully formed thought. It's a hiccup,
But
but
do you mean agreeable on your part or theirs?
since we're talking about their reaction, interaction, the way they are responding, partly theirs, but also I guess how to handle that as a more agreeable person. It's like there's the temptation to just take what is said at face value of a no means a no. And in one sense that's clear cut. Well, there are certain lines where I think it has to be pretty clear, although body language
Yes.
can contribute substantially to making that clear. Um, but the how to tell the difference between no and no, which I don't know how to say it, but no and no, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
and the different ways that can play out because it doesn't. There's an image I have of
It's
couples
difficult
who.
to.
Oh, gee, that's
Sorry,
difficult.
it's difficult
Yeah.
to define the edge,
Mm,
which is why people get into so much trouble. Like this is the grey line, and there isn't a black and white one. You have to be socially conscious enough to read body language and understand the vibes
yeah,
that you're getting from the person and judge it.
and we can't produce
And
those vibes in a conversation.
yeah,
Mm,
no, we can't lay out a set of rules to govern behavior during what is effectively a mating dance.
mm,
You know, you know, despair to the autist, but it's not gonna. You can't run an if this then that checklist. You can't run your mini program or your macros to get this to work. Right? You can run game, which is effectively the closest to that, but that's not what we're talking about here.
I
We're
feel like
talking
that's
about
what I'm wanting.
you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Like I can give you the best tips possible from the game side of things without it steering into the game side of things,
Hmm.
which is also a hard line to walk. And I think the difference really comes down to your intentions and whether or not you are deceptive.
Hmm.
If you use the tactics from those types of people but are honest and not deceptive, and your intentions are long-term monogamous relationship, then I don't see that as manipulative because you're not manipulating. You're catching her attention and interest and manifesting the parts of you that you have because you're not being deceptive that are attractive to her as initial signs. Um, it's such a dangerous area because all you need to get is a less than average consciously aware male who's maybe not that bright and a very agreeable woman. And you
Hmm.
have a masterful recipe where, by all letter of the law and words, it was consensual, but from her perspective, it wasn't.
Hmm.
Which is why this is such a difficult area in the law and why we had the big Me Too kerfuffle for a long time. Most of the people on the right, I think, got it wrong in a large way because they were making all kinds of claims about the law and how things work, and they weren't understanding the difficulty of actually legitimately saying no with force,
Hmm.
or like an agreeable person that is next to impossible, particularly if they are that way inclined because of, say, an abusive father.
Hmm.
They'll freeze and then they'll agree to things they don't want to agree to. And then they'll be in a position that they really don't want to be in.
Yeah, and that can happen to guys too. I think I mentioned seeing a video clip like
Yeah.
that last show. Yeah.
Yes.
Less common, but
Yeah, infinitely, but close to infinitely less common.
hmm.
And I think from what I'm aware, when it happens to guys, it is more likely to be an aggressive woman than a stupid one.
Hmm.
There's more likely to be an evil element. Not that that doesn't happen the other way around, obviously. She's a brutal world. But I think with the male to female missteppings. It's more likely to just be a dumb guy who really doesn't understand what's going on and just thinks that she's saying yes when she's really not,
Would
and with the
the
other way around. Sorry.
would the more the percentage of so there's a certain percentage of one night stands, let's say, as our test set or first
Mm.
sleeping togethers,
Yeah, first
where
encounter.
yep, first sexual encounters where the guy now where one of the two is almost aggressively pushing it and so being like I want to get you into bed and in a sense almost malevolently doing it and that my question is whether the percentage of them that are to that degree would be similar between male on female and female on male. It's just that in the male being the pushy one side of the or equivalent, um, there's a diluting effect of men being generally more pushy and physically bigger, and the as you said, dumb man being more likely to get what he wants by pushing and more likely to want that to start with. Whereas the manipulative, slightly psychopathic men make up, say, 2 to 3 times the percentage of the manipulative, slightly psychopathic woman trying to manipulate men.
Yes, yes, I would say that the genuine psychopaths who are acting in malevolent ways in this dynamic from female to male would be higher than from male to female.
Hmm.
But obviously, there'd be vastly more male to female in this situation because of the
Hmm.
personality differences and what you're describing about. There's also the IQ problem.
Hmm.
So there's more stupid males, which doesn't help.
Yeah, and there's also the manipulative woman may well be getting the stupid man and giving him what he wants in order to manipulate him. And I think an element of that happens
And
a lot with high wealth individuals.
and then there's the other half of reputation destruction, which
Mm,
is, I think, in this scenario, often used by women, which is you're going to do this or I'm going to accuse you of having done something wrong,
mm,
which I think happens a lot more than people want to think about.
mm,
It's such a weird thing that topic, the topic of malevolent feminine, is so, what's the word? Touchy,
hot button
dangerous.
issue. Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it feels unstable, like I'm walking on thin ice when I talk about like that. That it's something that our culture is starting to see as taboo. I legitimately remember having a conversation with a young woman about it was about rape, and she, I had to, I remember literally saying to her that women can be evil too, and
Mm,
she didn't think that. She had this worldview that only men could be, and she sort of had this moment of like, really? Women can, like, yeah. And then I walked through, divorce courts and that whole side of things, and she was pretty shell shocked by it because the idea of a woman acting in an evil manner, being vindictive or abusive or straight up psychopathic, is
mm,
not something that is accepted or not accepted to be said in a public space.
mm,
So therefore, it's not on media or TV, and therefore people don't learn about it until you get into the, you know, certain circles.
mm. And then you
Because
have
I just,
the
yeah.
the red pill group who take it to the opposite extreme, where it's like all women are evil. It's like, no, you're wrong. There are individuals who are bad, and there are groups who reinforce that within them, within the
Yeah,
group dynamics. But you're talking about individuals, and
yeah. Those
yeah,
guys might as well be the blue hairs screaming about how all men are evil. It's the same thing.
yeah,
It's more pathetic because they're men.
yeah. That's something that now the the proper way for a man to act because he is a man is a not fully processed idea in my head.
Okay. Do expand.
Possibly related to my own past experiences, but there's conflict between, now, speaking spontaneously, so not pre planned, of course, but there's conflict between uh, desire to be good. Yeah, and uh, apparently opposing meanings of that presented by different sources. And it's, I think it's fundamentally because I don't fully understand either side, although it also possibly comes from a distrust past suppression of good strength and aggression, like, and the concern over male and female roles in terms of restricting individuals, and the many cases of people who went outside their gender roles and did something amazing. And like, there's an author who I've read a lot of, and in a recent article he wrote, he described himself as, when he was a child, he was a Jane girl, the equivalent of a tomboy, but for a boy. And like the idea that a guy does not, you can still be male, you can still be a man and embody your masculinity in a different way, and you can still be a woman or a girl and embody your femininity in a different way. There are tomboys and Jane girls. I hadn't heard the term Jane girl before this, but it makes sense. Um, and that's still girls and boys. And there are still roles that work well for men and for women. But there are still the exceptions to those rules. And there are still patterns that work well. And to understand the male pattern as a path to move through, not necessarily that defines who you are, but it's like, okay, here is a positive way of acting in the world. Here is a set of responsibilities and a set of uh, rights is the wrong word, but a set of privileges doesn't sound right either. No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think, correct me if I've got this wrong.
Hmm.
What I think you're asking for is that you want to set up a interpretive structure, a way of looking at the world, or even could even be prescriptive, a way of looking at men and women and gender, I hate that word, men and women and their roles, and how you can have those roles, but also have the exceptions within a single framework.
Yeah.
Because
Because
you see that
yeah.
there's value in both,
Hmm.
in the rule and the exception.
Yes.
Okay. This is the way that I've come to look at it, is that You were talking about people being outside, that is, you wanted to allow for individual freedom,
Yes.
right? So the old school gender roles would be a structure, orderly, constricting, but it would be a structure. What is the opposite of order?
Chaos.
Right, not freedom. Well, yes, it's indistinguishable.
Yeah. And
My
we've discussed before about the freedom order, the freedom chaos order tyranny scale, and both ends are bad.
Yeah, you want ordered freedom in the middle. The walled garden, the escape into the desert, but to worship the divine structure. It's not about one or the other. Completely shutting down, and having only the roles and anything outside of it is cold, is totalitarian, and it's hobbling to a society because, like you say, every now and then there are people who are outside the structure who bring enormous value by being outside the structure. The structure should still be there and heavily culturally enforced, in my view, because
Enforced or reinforced, in the sense of there's positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Do you punish those who go outside it, or do you reward those who are within it, or the same thing in a
you
sense?
you have it has to be both. You can't really have one without the other. You can't say that I value this thing and I also value its opposite equally. You can't do that. That doesn't work. You can't say I really value people who stick to the role and I also really value people who don't. You can't have both. Because the brain doesn't work that way. And as you can see, now that people are starting to go, actually those that are outside the role are valuable too. It took like 3 years for them to turn around and go, no, we hate the standard role and it's wrong and should be abolished and everyone should be outside it. So celebrating difference is not actually a good thing. Anyway, the standard structure applies for most people and it gives most people support. Helping define your identity, culture helping define your identity is infinitely valuable. It simplifies your life. It gives you structure and support. It removes a whole bunch of unsurety,
Uncertainty.
whatever, from the uncertainty from those who can't handle it, and it helps provide a framework to interpret and go out into the world and function. It makes things very functional, and it helps the majority of people live a life without anxiety and chaos because they're not drowning in it. However, if you are going to break the standard model, you need to have a good enough reason that it's worth having a bit of mud slinged at you for it. And it's those people who are willing to have the mud slinged at them, who are the ones who bring enormous value by breaking the mold. If you take all of the people in the modern example who have broken the mold because they were encouraged to, they're not bringing any extra value to the table. If anything, they're making things worse.
Yeah.
The exceptions prove the rule. The structure helps most people, and those who step outside of it do bring enormous value. But the walls of the structure who hold everyone else in, yes, it's difficult for those who step outside, but extraordinary people will do extraordinary things, whether or not you encouraged them to do it, because they're extraordinary.
Another element that the extraordinary people who stepped outside the standard model, who we remember are the ones who did it well, who did it competently. Those who just rebelled and then crashed, we don't.
Yes.
So it's competence that's valued, not just compliance. Compliance is a simple form of competence. It's like master this structure and then live within it, and you'll be respected for living within that structure. It's simple. But if you break out of it, you'd better do it well.
Yeah, it's since George and the Dragon.
in the sense of going out and getting the gold as
Yeah, you got
a
to bring something back.
yeah, as an established path in the sense of, well, it's almost the opposite of an established path in a sense, but they're the exceptional ones are allowed to break the norms because they brought back value.
Well, it's like being an artist.
Hmm.
If you go out into the chaos and you don't find anything of value and you don't show it to anyone, no one gives a shit about you. And you leaving the standard model where you could have been of value is useless.
Hmm. How
You
many
know, a person
yeah, how
in
many
the artist
uncreative
example, it's
musicians? Yeah.
yeah, it's someone who goes out and makes terrible art and hides it in their basement for the rest of their life. But
Hmm.
they broke the mold. It's like all you did was damage the mold. You didn't bring value back. The ones who we remember are the ones who stood outside the mold and said, there's something here. It's important. Everyone in the mold needs to look at this.
Hmm.
And it was important. And those people should be praised as heroes because they literally are.
Hmm. And in a lot of
It's the
cases,
visionary.
I think that new gold that they find is not so much something to bring back within the mold, but something to add to the mold.
Yes.
Like I'm struggling to think of a sort of non-controversial example of, well, I guess music is the easiest one to define. Someone goes out and discovers new music that's good and speaks to a unaddressed need in people. And that this happens every generation. Like the music of every generation doesn't generally speak that well to the next generation.
Yeah.
And
Because times change.
yeah,
With
and
any great artist, I think, yeah, for visual art works better for my brain in terms of analogy, but I can see the music thing would work well for most people, like Hendrix or
mm,
people like that. The beginning
yeah,
of rock and roll, the end of the swing era.
yeah, and like the idea that going from the idea that there is something wrong with gay people to okay, you do that. What you do in your bedroom's up to you with consenting adults. That's up to you. And then we do this over here. And the fact that you're over there in your own bedroom doing your thing without bothering anyone, that's not a affront to anyone. Like people, the acknowledgement that different people are built differently, and to force people into a mold that abjectly punishes them for the nature of themselves seems like a bad idea. But at the same
But
time, to so that the original gay rights movements is what the you do what you want to do in your bedroom, love who you are drawn to love. That's fine. But then we see that trajectory extrapolated, and like the current pride flag with the original rainbow being split in half by the big dividing wedge of all the other triangles, whatever they represent, very symbolic of the attack on the gay community, essentially, that's happening by those who are shouting and screaming that they're supporting it when they seem to be doing far more harm than good towards it. And that would be a case of rather than just adding a piece to the mold as an art, this can be added to our society and makes it better. It's breaking apart a section of the mold, and then it's the idea of within the mold is order and outside the mold is chaos, and then I'm just thinking scenes in various books where like the primordial chaos as a reality outside reality where
mm,
only the beings of greatest power could traverse it without being destroyed. And if you would hypothetically break the barrier established by the gods between the ordered realm of the world and the primordial chaos outside it, then you would, uh, well, then the world would be destroyed.
The flood of monsters headed by the dragon itself would come. That's the
Oh,
old story.
the symbolism coming from all directions in this.
Well, we're going to experience it. We live in a society, in a culture, who has forgotten the danger of chaos.
Mm,
We're so secure and comfortable. We haven't had real chaos in a long time. We manufacture chaos because we're bored. We look at chaos on movies and TVs and play it on our phones because we're bored, because we're so secure and we know nothing will ever happen to us. We want to watch TV shows of people murdering each other because that's never going to happen to me. It's so
yeah,
safe here.
yeah.
And because of that, and because of what we talked about before about celebrating the ones who broke the mold, turning to breaking the mold as the active goal and succeeding, chaos is
Oh,
flooding in and people are falling out into chaos. I think that's
oh,
probably the better way of saying it. The wall has been broken like a column, and those who were not by the foundations of said column are falling out and landing in chaos and drowning. And the water's getting rougher and rougher and rougher with every body that falls into it.
that's an interesting point you make that the it was we have had within the mythological structure of progress a archetype of the lone innovator, the inventor, the Bill Gates, the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musk at the moment, so on. That archetype of someone who the Jimi Hendrix, the so on. Was he Queen?
He's a great artist, any great artist in any field.
Yeah, yeah. They broke the mold and found something new, and it's the thinking that it's taking their archetype and seeing the breaking of the mold, the breaking of the existing oppression that was preventing them from getting to that gold out there. That breaking is what was the virtuous bit, and then emulating that, and so searching for molds to break in as an act of virtue. But it's missing the point of the breaking of the mold. The mold was not broken they because it was virtuous. It was the hole they made was not immediately sealed up again because they found gold on the other side of it. Like people can reach out into chaos themselves all the time.
It's because they brought it back. The great ones we remember who
Mm.
walked out into chaos, breaking the mold to do so, found something more valuable than the damage they did, and then brought it back and shared it with everyone and came back into the fold, and the hole was sealed.
Or encouraged to fold out to them where they had found the gold.
No, because there's always
Semantics.
an act of compromise.
Yeah, yeah,
They always had to come back a bit.
yeah.
They may have gone out 10 meters and come back 5, and then the mold formed around them there.
Mm,
Whereas now we're in the situation where, as you say, people see breaking the mold as the heroic part, not the finding something valuable and sharing it with the community.
mm,
So breaking the community becomes the goal. So all I see is many people sitting up there thinking, I'm such a hero, while they soar off the branch they're sitting on. Or, they're all standing around hacking the tree that they're standing on, somehow thinking, this is going to be great. I'm going to burn it. I feel great. I'm the
yeah.
hero. Not realizing that they're going to fall and drown, and so is everyone that they love. With such children, we don't know how bad things can get, which is hilarious because that's all of our schools have ever taught us was, oh, the Nazis, things can be bad. Oh, look what these other people, bad
Mm,
people did. And yet somehow we think, well, they're not us, so that'll never happen to
yeah.
us.
It's not that uh what's a way of saying this? Bad people aren't born with a label on their forehead. They're
Well,
not
they
fundamentally
yeah,
different. It's what's the quote from
but
Solzhenitsyn? The line between good and evil runs through every man's heart. Every man in the
yeah,
broad sense. Like if you trace that word back to its origins, man meant human. Wo- Woman meant female. Were man meant male. Were man and woman.
yeah. Man was the word for human.
Yeah,
We are mankind.
yeah. Like were man, were wolf means man wolf, not to same root word, but it's like to say man is not to say male at exclusion of female.
No, that's why it's mankind.
Yeah.
It's I'm not sure if you remember, but I seem to remember from my education, if I can call it that it was always told that the Nazis did it to the people.
Mm.
No one ever said the story of like, no, actually, it was their neighbors.
Mm.
There was like some Nazis in power, but what really happened is that people started dragging their neighbors out into the streets and beating them and throwing them on cars. The people did it,
Mm.
just like you and me, not the government, not the evil Nazi party, your maths teacher or your neighbor Bob
Mm. It's the
or you.
ordinary men story. Yeah,
Yeah.
which
And that's also why they don't talk about the communist stuff, because it was 100% always the people.
yeah.
And you can't hide it with that story.
An interesting thing about the summary of Ordinary Men that I've heard, it's one of those books I need to read sometime. Um, but that these guys were being ordered by their Nazi superiors to do horrific things, and they didn't want to do them. But the reason they did, and any of them were allowed to leave at any time, they were not prevented from leaving, but they did not want to leave their friends to face this without them. They wanted to share the burden and so support their friends. And the idea that was why they did the horrible things. It wasn't that they wished to be evil, it's that they knew it was terrible and evil, and they didn't want to leave their friends to face this alone.
It's
And
almost, I think I get that story and I get why it's so impactful for people, but I feel like it's almost a watered down version of the truth to make it easier for people to swallow.
hmm,
Because I think about that and it's like, okay, they did it because they didn't want to abandon their people and they had a choice every step of the way
but then they
to
got
do
used
it,
to it.
which is, yes, which is what happened in every totalitarian country, by the
Mm,
way. For the 15 years before shit flipped on its head, Nazi Germany included, it was one step at a time for every citizen in their
mm,
normal life. Oh, we just won't, I don't know, we just won't have him over for dinner because he's, one of them.
mm.
And then it's we won't serve him. And then it's we won't feed him at the supermarket. One step at a time. But I think the real freaky thing when you think about it is people beating their neighbors in the streets. What happened in Nazi Germany and the communist ones? It wasn't because they were encouraged to do so, like a squad going onto an international raiding party and being told that they could leave if they wanted to, but you're leaving your people behind.
Mm.
It was just allowed all of a sudden. It was accepted culturally. You can do that and you won't get punished. And all of a sudden, people came out of the woodwork to, like, yes, I will hurt you because I can. Not because I'm told I should. Well, yes, I'm told I should. I don't have to. I'm not even being encouraged by someone directly in front of me who's saying, will you do this thing, officer, whatever. The government and the society was pushed to the point where ostracizing became acceptable. Then all of a sudden, violence against the ostracized became acceptable. And ordinary citizens walked out of their homes, dragged their neighbors from their homes, and beat them and raped them and killed them.
Mm.
because they could.
It's like the Walter
Because
White story arc, and I haven't seen Breaking Bad, but like, he started that as, oh, it's basically a victimless crime. The drugs get in anyway, and I'll make money for my family before I die by selling meth. And then by the end of it, he'd become a hard, brutal man who enjoyed it.
even from the start, there's a
Mm.
line within the first few episodes, I think, where he does something rather bad with his wife. And she's like, "Why is this so good?" And he says, "Because it's wrong."
Mm.
He knew from the start he enjoys doing this because he's doing the wrong thing. There's nothing more than human beings like than a little slice of hell.
Mm.
We really like to break the rules, and we really, really like to be evil.
And to try and pretend that that isn't within all of us, that we're not all tempted
Yeah.
to some degree by that, and
What do we teach our
it's
kids? Everyone's good. The world's love and light, and everyone's will care for you. Everyone's good. It's like, no,
I
everyone
I'm not teaching my
would
son that. Not the full
love.
harshness of it, but the
Yeah,
the life's
yeah. You got
hard.
to find a way of saying it, and that's not going to traumatize them. But I'm still working on that one.
Mm.
But there is a lot of truth to the fact that given the opportunity to do so, oh, it was a speech that Peterson made. I don't remember where, but it was like a minute and a half rant that I've never forgotten. And I don't want to quote it because I'll fail, but it was the point about communist leaders and people who think they know what real communism is. You know, if I was the dictator, I would have ushered in the utopia. And his point was, you are not some angel who could resist the temptation. If you were in their position, you would have done exactly what they did and probably worse
Mm.
and loved it. You're not some better angel who could resist all the temptations of evil. And even if you were, the first thing that happened is you'd be shot in the back of the head and someone worse than you would take it.
Mm.
Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what happened in places like Nazi Germany is that the culture said, oh, you can have power over someone else. This group only. But you, average citizen, you now have power of life and death over someone else's land, someone else's, well, life, their property, everything. And that was immediately abused because humanity, boy, does love a good exercise in power.
I'm just thinking of the forms of power over others that are being allowed and encouraged at the moment. Like there's power
Mm.
over white men, which, well, that's going to end well. But even more fundamental, even more immediately concerning than that, there's the by signing up for this group and saying that you are now a woman in a even though you were born with a penis, you suddenly have the right to exercise power over women
Mm.
who were born with a vagina instead, and that that temptation to power, like we've seen that play out, like that women's rights speaker who came to New Zealand, and the security were there keeping her safe from the raging mob and saying to her afterwards that you were lucky to get out of that alive, quite possibly due to the competence, or quite probably due to the competence of the security. But like, if the security wasn't there and the mob got hold of her,
Yeah.
yeah, or if
Yeah,
the
it's when the culture says that you are morally justified in committing atrocities to another class,
mm,
another group, another individual. People will see that.
what's that quote? Something along the lines of, "The people don't fear the people who think they're wrong, fear the people who are absolutely sure they're right, or something along those lines.
Oh, that's good. I like that.
Yeah. But it's like, yeah, the person who thinks they're wrong, like, you see it in all sorts of shows, particularly those aimed at kids, that the plucky main character can convince the bad guy to be good again just by talking right to him. And it's like, that's a nice
Mm,
fantasy. But
yeah, finally.
no, it's like if every word you say sounds like it came from the devil to the other guy, and he's so wrapped up in his self-righteous rage that nothing you say can get through. Like that's where the trans activists are these days to a large degree. It's like it's self-righteous rage that how
Well,
dare they oppress us.
that's why there's nothing more dangerous than an ideology, because
Mm,
they have an answer for everything that makes them the victim and
mm,
makes you the oppressor. And that's why you got to give hats off to Marx, because he knew what he was doing. He wrote once, it was in a letter to a friend of his that he was conspiring with, that he would bring the world to its knees and millions upon millions would die because of his words. He did it on purpose. He knew he was creating a, a biological mind virus that was going to destroy untold amounts of lives and misery. And he designed it that way because he knew that the pen is mightier than the sword.
mm.
Nothing kills better than an ideology.
One pen can
Not
raise 1,000
destruction
swords.
or a million, but
Mm,
100 million bodies in the ground
mm,
in the worst way imaginable.
yeah.
Ideas, you don't have ideas, ideas have you. I'll speak the words of dead philosophers. All those ideas are running your life.
Mm. I'm just thinking about how, if we go back 5 years, we probably wouldn't, most people wouldn't have imagined the world we live in now. Even if you
Yeah.
said there was a massive pandemic, it's like, okay, that would give you some pointers, but it wouldn't.
Well, I think that's the greatest example of what we're talking about.
Mm,
The moral justification that people use during that time to oppress and abuse others. We were on the knife's edge of turning into a place like Germany. All that had to be said from the official media or the institutions was, these people who aren't getting it need to be locked away or need to be rounded up. And it would have been a bloodbath. And we would have become one of those countries.
I feel like
We were
the.
days away.
I don't think it could have progressed that quickly, but I think that it was. Like you talked
Did you not
about,
feel it at the time?
I was dealing with my own stuff at that time, so maybe I was.
Okay.
Yeah.
Naturally, I would have been more sensitive because I was one of the people who pushed back against that.
Yeah.
But everywhere I go, I felt it.
Mm,
There was an air of hatred from everyone who was part of the norm group.
yeah.
Hatred and hostility and aggression, just foaming at the mouth, ready for it to be okay to dispatch me.
Yeah, because I started being well, I became a single parent in February 2020, and I handed in my 2 week notice 1 week before the first lockdown. So I was dealing with stuff at that time.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, but
Enough reason than any.
yeah,
I think we were unbelievably close to a very dark world. And I don't know why we didn't end up there. I suspect it's a large amount of pushback from people, and then the advantages of technology being able to make that message heard. But
I wonder if on a slightly more abstract level, I might be wrong on this, but if we go back to 1920s, 1900s, would you agree with the idea that there was more social cohesion then?
yes,
So then my hypothesis is that when the society moved, it moved, or at least when the cultural unit moved, when the national identity moved in a certain direction, it moved more or less as a whole. And even
yes,
if it's moving against a part of that country, then it sort of moved in unity. Whereas these days, the society is much more fractious, and if you were to have a good leader make an inspiring speech in favor of doing something, the first result is more likely to be a whole lot of arguments. Unless it's abundantly clear to everyone that, yeah, that's the thing we should do, which, like responses to natural disasters, like, okay, get the helicopters with flying food in.
it's
But,
because there's no identity anymore,
mm,
or there's not one. There is not one national identity. See? Caught a cable. Partially, I think that obviously is partially to do with the technology that we have, and that being obviously causing fractionation, whatever. But I think there's also a shift that happened probably late 70s, early 80s. That was what the identity needs to be is against the identity. Like we talked about before, of all of a sudden, what is praiseworthy is those who are outside the system.
mm.
Don't be the man kind of thinking, and then, be the rebel
So,
thinking.
so would the hippies
And
have
what
been the
that,
first wave of that?
yeah,
Mm.
yeah, and then the sort of punky 80s stuff became the next wave of that, which was you don't want to be a part of the identity. There shouldn't be a national identity. It should be
Mm.
an individual's identity. Fight the system, overthrow it. And because of that, now we can't move as a unit because we're not a unit anymore. Our nations aren't a nation of people united.
Mm.
United we stand. We're not.
Separated we
What is
squabble.
an yeah? Well, I
While
mean,
things are good,
what
we
is a
squabble.
nation? Yeah,
Yeah.
squabble becomes worse very quickly. But what is a
Yes.
nation other than a large group of people with a shared identity and vision?
Mm.
You have a split in direction. Like think about a couple. You can't go in two directions at once because
Mm.
if you do, you're not the same unit anymore. You're a separate unit.
Mm.
And I
So,
think that's what's happened on the national scale is
yeah,
that people have started moving in different directions.
with a couple,
And
as with the
because of that,
nation, the way each individual moves in that same direction, like from a distance, it might look like they're following the same path, but if you zoom in, it's more like a braided river of um, each doing their own thing to move in
you're a
approximately
helix.
the agreed direction. Yeah, yeah, or something a bit more chaotic than that. And then on a wider society, it's a great tapestry moving in a certain direction, in a sense, and trying out some directions and pulling back from others and so on. But when that single tapestry that interweaves from one side to the other splits into separate strands of ribbon, then those are each fighting for dominance, then that's not a single nation of many strands. It's individual groups seized by their individual ideologies or their individual identities. It's a group of identities fighting for dominance, and then that's what we see in the cultural discourse of our age. It's identities fighting for dominance.
Yeah, because everyone has a different worldview and a different worldview on what the nation should be.
Mm.
People aren't even going in the same direction anymore.
Mm.
People are going in opposite directions. And they want their one to be the one that takes the nation with them. And there's no way that that can continue without the nation splitting.
Mm.
It's going to fractionate. It's going to fall into civil war. And we don't have geographic boundaries to make a clean cut. To have, smaller fractious nations. You can't have a Brexit type situation unless you have people shift geographically first, which
Mm.
is happening in the States, like for a large part, and there's a lot of good things about that. People are moving to the state that has the ideology or laws that they like, and it's likely that the union will be dissolved at some point
Mm.
because you can't maintain a higher level structure that doesn't have everything underneath it cohesive.
At the
This
least,
is
I
why the
think.
globalists will never work.
Oh yeah, yeah. At the least in the
Why
US,
the
I
EU
think
failed.
the federal level will be substantially shrunk. Like there's a what was it like
Well,
a
that's the optimistic view.
yeah, that is the optimistic view, and that one is the closest to legal fruition in the sense of a certain number of states have already agreed to it, and as in it's in the legislation that as soon as enough states agree to it, then it's enacted and a national convention is called, and then the
It,
constitution is changed.
it's getting really close.
Yeah.
It's getting really close to a majority of states who want to dissolve the union,
Mm.
which would be a really interesting world. I think it would be amazing, but you have problems of places like China, but they're still in the superpower united age,
Mm.
so that's a problem. But
Yeah.
it's sort of beside the point. You can't. Mm, it's not going to be healed.
Yeah, we're in a time of breakdown, not build up. There's been a lot of build up has happened, and now there's breakdown on so many levels. There's the physical decay of infrastructure, um, which in one sense our infrastructure is better than it's ever been because there's more of it. But the rate of breakdown seems to be higher than the rate of build up. Like, sure, in this country they rolled out fiber relatively recently, so there's higher speed internet everywhere. But things like the number of potholes on the roads seems to be increasing, and the quality of the fixes seems to be going down. And how long will it be until we start getting less reliable um, power in more distant areas? And I think New Zealand is probably a bad gauge for the rest of the world. Like there's areas of the US, which is the one everyone points to and laughs at in a lot of ways, where country roads are being allowed to return to gravel, which to my mind sounds like it's not making it a gravel road again. It's just, oh, we'll just start ignoring that road, and then people just
Yeah,
drive over it bumpily.
yeah, it's a difficult one. I don't think we can really use New Zealand as a great example because we're such a weird nation.
Hmm.
Um, and the larger a nation is, the more problems it has. That same thing. As the larger a structure gets, the more rigid it becomes, and then the less ability it has to adapt to changes. I think it's also worth noting that um, in a world where a business or corporation doesn't have to adhere to boundaries too hard between nations, that weak and divided nations and a weak and divided populace is really good for business,
Hmm.
just as a worthwhile note. Just what I was getting at before, way earlier on with the music setup, is that, weak and divided people tend to be more consumerist by a
Hmm.
large degree, and also more impulsive and all kinds of other things. Not having an identity turns out to make people anxious and uncomfortable. And when people are anxious and uncomfortable and depressed, they are more likely to spend money on shit they don't need to make themselves feel better, which
Hmm.
is great because now that companies know that, they have a real incentive to make everyone in the world anxious and depressed and uncomfortable so they can maximize their profit margin.
Hmm. Yeah, that sounds similar to what was it? where you have aligned interests, you don't need a conspiracy in the sense of if you have 10 people with the same goal and similar means to achieve it and an awareness of each other's existence and some sort of theory of mind of what the others are doing, then you don't need to have a big conspiracy where they get together and plan what they're going to do. They just each do their thing, which happens to coordinate because of their similar goals. So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think it's really interesting to make that statement because very often I get called a conspiracy theorist because I make claims like that. And I think people misunderstand what I'm saying.
Hmm.
Think people often will think, oh, he thinks that there's a group of evil people who have decided to do the evil thing and that they're all conspiring together to make this evil outcome. And it's like, okay. One, define group of people. Does all of the board members in a single company count as a conspiracy? Or is that just a board meeting where they decided to do an evil thing?
Hmm. What
Does
counts
it have to
as
be people in multiple industries? Does it have to be multiple companies in the same industry?
what
What
counts
makes a
as an evil
conspiracy?
thing?
I'm pretty liberal on my application of
Hmm.
that was evil.
Yeah.
Like the comment before about a company knowing that depressed people buy more shit, so therefore I'll make them depressed if I can. Facebook. Um, well, all social media companies, including YouTube. Yeah, that's evil. I
And they dress it up in flowery language so that
yeah,
it's advanced marketing strategies, not how to depress your customers so they buy shit they don't need.
yeah. I don't care how many people were involved in the planning. The fact that it was planned and done with knowing what it was, it's still evil.
Hmm.
You can call, like, to me, that's what a conspiracy theory is that a person or a group of people with power in the world decided to do a thing that was evil, knowing it was evil.
Hmm.
Not because it was evil, but because it got them some reward.
That group could be two people who meet at a rich person's resort.
Yeah, or it could just be the board, um, board of directors at Facebook doing
Hmm.
their weekly or their quarterly review
Or Nestle
meeting or
saying
whatever.
that water's not a human right. We're going to have as much as we want.
Yeah, because they want their profit margin and they're just
Hmm.
sitting in their meeting with their suits going like, well, we need to increase our revenue this quarter, so here's a proposal.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter what language or what suits you wear. In my mind, that is evil and in this realm of conspiracy. Like, does it have to be
Hmm.
illegal? Is that what makes it conspiracy?
Or
Or is it
they do it
really
illegally
just
too.
that calling something a conspiracy is a really good way to make the average person not take the idea seriously?
Hmm. I think it's
Oh, I think
definitely
he did
used
an
that
evil
way.
thing. You're a conspiracy theorist. Which means everyone else, don't listen to him.
Hmm.
It's that lovely quote about if they're trying to shut you up, that means you have something good to say.
Yeah.
Always like that one. We're really in the weak men make hard times part of the cycle.
Hmm.
And I think we're edging into the hard times makes strong men part of the cycle. Like I think we're getting close to that border.
Yeah, the border, not the depths of it.
No, no.
Yeah.
I don't even think that we've ticked over into that part yet, but I think that's
Hmm.
we're up, if it's a clock, we're up on the edge of the angle there.
It's going to look very different and very different. It's going to look very different in different parts of the world.
I still think the baby boomers are going to go down as the worst generation in history. Yeah, I say that. I'm being a
Worst
bit
is a value
hyperbolic.
judgment. It's going to be highly
If you
dependent.
exclude all of the world wars and communist stuff, which is a hell of an if, I get that, but I see them as the weak men who made the hard times.
Hmm.
Not so much weak, just immoral and evil. You know,
Can you be Ignorantly
Breaking the
evil.
society. I don't
Because
think that you can.
because
I think if you don't realize that indebting your nation to pay for something you want now is actually indebting your children, I think that's not ignorance. I think that's willful ignorance.
yeah, because evil's a one of those words which is thrown around a lot, but
Mm.
often ill-defined.
Okay. I don't see them as the generation who looked at what they were doing in full consciousness and said, yes, I'm going to do the evil thing. I think it was a lot of them that did that. But I think they were the generation who said, uh, I can feel that my conscience is telling me that there's something wrong here, so I'm going to do everything I can to not look at it and just go along with it anyway because I get the thing I want. You
Mm.
know, oh, we can just indebt the country to get our benefit that we want now. Yeah, let's do that. And then the conscience in the back of their brain is like, where's the money coming from? Uh, no, I'm not going to think about that. I'm gonna go watch the TV. I'm gonna just I'm
I think there's a
gonna
lot.
run from those thoughts.
There's a big spectrum between the people who honestly believed what they were told, that it would be fine, that because of our new economics and infinite growth, that debt would be fine. I think there are people who just honestly believed it, and there are the people who, as you say, had the niggles and thought that doesn't make sense, and then just pushed it back. Oh, I'm sure they know what they're doing. Oh, I've got things to deal with now.
Hmm. I think what I'm noticing in this conversation that is I don't know if it's I am far more than you or far more than people in general willing to place blame or give
I
harsh judgments to individuals or groups.
I am.
There's a quote from V
Hmm.
from Vendetta that's actually running through my mind about
Hmm.
this, which was he's going to kill this woman who's done horrible things.
Hmm.
And she was explaining to him why she did all the things. And she's like, actually, a nice woman, and she had her goals and her reasons. And he simply replies with, I haven't come for what you hope to do. I came for what you did.
Hmm.
Justice, judgment isn't about your intention. It's about what you did. Whether you did it full knowingly, consciously, or whether you just ignored the warning signs, you still did it. And while this generation that I'm speaking of is probably not really aware of what they've done, they're still, obsessing about their house valuation while everyone else in every generation after them is never going to be able to buy one. They turn a blind eye to that.
Hmm.
In the majority of cases, it's like, oh, my house price has gone up another no this year. That's awesome. Look at my valuation. And then their kids are like, I'm struggling to hold down a job and I won't be able to, have, buy a home. And they're like, no, I'm going to, I will sell my home and I'll go on a cruise and I'll spend all of it and I'll live in a fancy retirement. And you bet your ass you're going to pay me my pension. But we're getting taxed all to hell here. And oh, what's on TV? Tell me about the news. Tell me about the war overseas.
Something
It
that
doesn't matter what you wanted, what you meant. It matters what you do.
something that comes to mind in the way we're each approaching this is how do I describe this concept I read a while ago and 90% remember. Um, it's in the way that the world is perceived in the example I'm thinking of by different cultures. So you have, and you can trace this curve through history, but there's intentions don't matter. It's actions, and it's eye for an eye, which is not a which is the legal system in certain areas where the recompense for an action is the equivalent in reverse, both for gifts and good deeds and hard ones. If you, by malicious act or accident, break someone's leg, the justice, the just action, the right action to flow from that result, the natural consequence is you should have your leg broken now. That is justice. And there is a simple equality to that. If you cause someone to lose sight in their eye, then you too shall lose sight in your eye. If you give gifts to people, you should receive the same gifts in return, or this equivalent value of gifts. And then you go up through the levels of abstraction. Like if you go to Old English law, it's like the penalty for murder is this many coins or this fine. And so rich people could and did get away with murder by our current definitions. They would commit a crime and pay the fine and be done with it. And a poor person would steal a loaf of bread and be destitute for life because of the penalty for that action. And that's
I
a
don't believe in
very...
fines.
Sorry?
That's why I don't believe in fines, just as a side note.
Yeah.
It's just the cost of doing the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with you there. Um, but the point is that it's a very literal action consequence, and your reference to it doesn't matter what your intent was, it's the action that is that it's the action that was judged is reminiscent of this, because what tends to happen historically at the around the peak of a civilization, and it reaches its maximum at that peak because afterwards it starts to decline, of ivory towers of abstraction being built up. And you see this in law, that what's the spirit of the law? What's the intent? What's the difference between manslaughter and murder? And so on, that towers of abstract interpretation of the world are built, and then when the psychological and cultural edifice of that civilization starts to crumble, people reflect on those abstract constructions and realize that they don't really exist. And then you get what in the article I'm thinking of was termed the barbarism of reflection, that when you reflect on things, you realize they have no foundation. Like the pattern of sounds I'm using to communicate is abstract. It has no foundation in reality, but it's an agreed upon pattern for communication. And we're seeing elements
Like
of that.
money.
Yeah, money is an abstraction. Money as opposed to currency or wealth.
Yes, I should have used the words currency. My apologies.
Well, I feel like we're even getting divorced from currency these days. That like money is so abstract. It's like there's Bitcoin, there's whatever. When you take a step back, it's currency. It's like I have this number of dollars, but then you've got inflation and financial shenanigans that calls that into question. Then you have a coin of gold. Okay, that's a step closer to reality. Then you have land. Then you have food. Then you have water. Then you have air. It's like the further down the hierarchy you go, the more real it gets. And the things further up the hierarchy are the abstract representations of that we use to manipulate it. The same as we use the abstract representations in the legal system to work like chess pieces or keys on a keyboard. We work with numbers in a computer. It's all abstract towers built up from this foundation of real reality. And I was speaking more from the perspective of the abstract, the what did they mean, the how can it be interpreted perspective, where you're speaking more from the what happened, what was the result of the action, or what action was taken perspective. And I suspect your way of seeing it is uh more defensible. It's more real than my way in this sense.
It's one hand of two.
Mm,
It's the old saying that God rules with mercy and justice. You can't have one.
mm,
You can't have one without the other. Too much mercy and evil will rule the world, and too much judgment and the innocent will be cast into the fire.
mm,
It's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, as I used to try to mold myself to be the balance of all things. In terms of these sort of societal positions, let's say. So, as an example, any given political argument, I used to try and find the middle spot that would be the compromise that everyone would agree to. And I wish a politician would do that. Obviously, I'm sick of the fighting, but I've come to accept that I am rather extreme in a lot of ways on a lot of things, and in my own way. And that is not only valuable, but necessary in our time. I shouldn't be trying to be the middle ground to appease the other side. My job isn't to meet them in the middle. My job is to pull them closer to me. I'm a person who's heavy on judgment and light on mercy for a lot of things. And that's not good if everything was based on how I wanted it. I would be a bad dictator. But in a democratic system, or even just in a cultural system, if I could pull the society towards my side, I think things would be better. I'm not, how do I say it? I've come to see my temperament and my positions on things as a reaction to the world and the reality around me. And it is an overreaction. And it's intended to do so to step outside the norm and hopefully pull the norm a little bit along with me. Rather than trying to be the person who is being the best balance of both sides, as if I was trying to be the greatest king. That's not my role, and I shouldn't be trying to be that role. People will say that, you are too extreme on this thing, on this position, on that position. And my answer is effectively, yeah, I know. But that doesn't mean I'm going to change, because I, for whatever reason, am extra sensitive to cultural change, or the cultural state. And if this is my reaction to it, then I think that that has value. And hopefully, through expressing that in a public form, whether if we do more political conversations or just in a philosophical way, is valuable.
it's achieving
I think of,
stability through the opposing forces. You don't know where the right balance is, and none of us do. But there,
yes,
you've
yes,
got
I'm not trying
one
to
side of
be the
that.
one with the answers.
Mm,
I'm not trying to be the one with the answers. I'm trying to push or pull, whichever your metaphor, in a direction that I think we need to go. Hence my nature at the moment of being like, no justice and judgment is needed to be demanded, because we've got too merciful that we're letting criminals run free. That we're
mm,
always going for the, no, I understand, it's okay. When really we need a bit of like, no, it was bad what you did.
mm.
Um, yeah, I lost it.
I'm just
I,
saying. Yep.
an example I think of is someone like Mincha Smallbug.
Who?
Worth looking up. Curtis Yarvin, maybe? I think Mincha Smallbug is his pen name or whatever. But he is beyond far right writer. And I think he is that way because he's trying to be someone who's outside the Overton window, waving at everyone, saying, like, hey, look over here. Maybe you should, like, come this way just a little bit. There's actually something of value. The intention is not to say that me, like him, that if everything was done the way that I say, everything would be amazing. Which is, I think, what people try and do in politics. They're having these arguments with other people, and what they're trying to do is be like, well, if I was dictator, these are the things that I'd do, and the world would be great. Which is a really bad way to try and change the culture, because by nature, you're going to be compromising in that situation. And on any philosophical issue, any issue, it doesn't matter. If you're trying to be the compromised position, that's the right answer, and the person you're talking to is to one side of you or the other, you're not going to bring them to the right answer. You're only going to bring them halfway.
So it's like not. It's rather than being the good negotiator and coming to the table and proposing a negotiable solution, you're doing your own argument a disservice by strawmanning your own position in order to come closer to a middle ground. You're haggling too close to their value to start with, so that by the time you finish, it'll be.
I wouldn't say that I'm straw manning my own position.
Well, I'm not saying you are, but I'm saying that the scenario you're proposing of the politician trying to
Oh, yes,
oppose that,
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes, yes. Yeah, well, no. No, because what I'm describing is I used to do that. And I still, in a large sense, believe that the compromised positions that I can create are actually the right answer. But rather than standing in that position and saying, here's what I believe and you should agree with me, I'm stepping as far away from that position as the person is on the opposite side the other way.
Yeah. It's like haggling.
And I'm
You don't.
negotiating. Yeah, I'm negotiating from the extreme.
Yeah. So if you think the product is worth $15 and you're haggling, you start at 10, they start at 20. You don't start at, well, I think it's worth 15, so I'll start at 15. You start off to one side and then argue your point to break, knowing that the other person is trying to get it high, you want it to be lower. So you start at a lower value than you think is fair to pay for it to try and pull them down to the value you think is fair.
Yeah, it's like a negotiation.
And
I'm doing the same thing on a political or philosophical. I'm getting a sense from the culture that it's in X place over there, and it really should be Y in the middle. But I'm going to go to Z, and then argue with it to try and like pull it this way.
And you don't know exactly
like,
where is the best place.
No, but I know it's not over there.
It's almost.
I know there's value here.
Yeah, it's almost a team effort of if you're over to one side arguing that it should be more toward you, and they're over the other side arguing, and then suddenly they come 90% over to you, then you're like, oh, wow, they must have seen more value here than I thought. If you thought the position was somewhere in the middle and they come 90% over to you, then oh, wow, well, it must be the best point must be closer to me than I thought, or vice versa. If everyone's arguing in good faith, then if they don't come over to you at all, then you'll draw toward them in negotiating a compromise. And so it's an acknowledgement that you can't know all the answers, you can't know the right answer, so you're relying on them to find the other side.
And I don't want to. I don't want to be the guy with the answers. All I want to do is what we talked about before, is point at that thing and go, yeah, it's really not that. Like whatever it is that you've convinced yourself that you believe is the answer to everything, it's not, because of these things. the killing sacred cows conversations that we've had.
Mm.
I got a feeling it's something to do with that of, I'm going to go way out into the far field, into something that is unacceptable to you, and I'm going to pick up a diamond and I'm going to show it to you and go, looky here, there's something that you can agree with.
Mm.
I think a while ago we had a discussion about, I keep mentioning this dinner I had at the Indian restaurant, but I talked about white nationalism with a bunch of Indians, and it was this very liberal Indian woman, and I made a whole bunch of points that she couldn't argue against. That she was sitting there going, "Damn it, I agree with that." And it's not because I believe these things, but it's to the point of like, there is value in positions that are unacceptable to the public consciousness. And I like going outside, like the artist in our example, breaking the mold, finding that thing of value, and then bringing it back and showing it to everyone. Look at
Yeah.
this. Hopefully, the mold can come a little bit towards me.
Yeah. And use this
I
one
don't want
useful
to break
thing
it.
because there
Yeah.
Nazism was overall terrible. We can agree pretty well on that. Like the number of deaths is a solid enough argument to that on its own. But saying that every single thing that was in that space was also terrible is like they had a functioning military that requires organization. Therefore, there was some value in their structure of organization. It's like it didn't instantly fall down. It had certain horrifically terrible, evil aspects to it. Yes, see those and reject
Yeah.
them.
But they
But
also had good policies on certain domestic political issues.
yeah, and good
You can't
engineers
look
and
at, yeah, you can't look at a system like that and say every single policy they ever produced was nothing but completely evil.
yeah,
No, no. Majority, sure, I'll agree with that. Probably still no. It's probably actually only a few. But, you know,
because you need a lot of good policies to make a society function at all, or broadly
yeah.
functional policies.
Or very little bad ones, I think is
Mm,
probably the better way. I think you can get away with almost no good policies as long as you don't have like one terrible one.
yeah, and there's a difference between
I think,
mediocre and good or bad.
which is why I think the larger an organization gets, the more likely it is to collapse in terms of governance.
Mm,
Because if you increase the number of laws, you increase the likelihood of duds, and then you increase the likelihood of ones that are antithetical to the spirit. And those are the ones that just corrupt the whole thing to its core.
mm, yeah. Something that we haven't gone very far into the nature of the concept of evil, and I think it would link in well with what you've mentioned before about your metaphysical perspective, because like the idea of evil feels like it needs to come from something beyond culture. And I suspect we don't have time for that tonight. I'm feeling like I need to head to
No,
bed soon, but I think that would
yeah,
be
I think we've not found a nice close to what we were discussing.
yeah. So what do we call it?
Got a nice wee exploration of my sacred cows thing again, which I quite like. No, you're right. There is something, nature of good and evil. That's gonna be a show.
Yeah.
You still keep bugging me about doing this the one that we referenced a while back about monotheism and helping me figure it out, and then we can do your polytheism one, and then we maybe have a debate or whatever. But and I didn't even think about the AR stuff this week that was on
Hmm.
my mind because I've still got everything in the background about um, technology companies and the way we use technology and the problems with that. Like that's really on my mind at the moment. So perhaps we can do that one next week. These big topics, like the monotheism thing that I think that can be shelved, and same with the good versus evil. We'll get there. We're on episode 25 or whatever. I don't know what one it is, but we got time, you know.
Hmm.
I think we should stick with what's spilling over in our brains. I really liked this conversation though.
Yeah.
Dangers of being an artist or something like that. But yeah, I've really got the dangers of technology and how it can be fitted into our lives and what works. on my mind, especially with the the Apple Apple Vision Pro
Beware
that
breaking
they
the
came out.
mold, for beyond its borders lies chaos.
Oh,
Or there be
Jesus
dragons
Christ.
beyond the mold.
There be dragons. Yeah, that's not a bad one. Might go with that. Yeah, I wasn't expecting that conversation. That was good. I like that.
Yeah. It's not what we planned on before we started talking, but it was better.
Well, yeah, we talked about the archetype of being an artist or a creative.
Yeah. Which is held
And
up
it's
as
funny.
almost a salvation like figure in our society.
Well, I mean, it is. It's the redemptive hero. That's always what it is. That's Noah or or Jesus or Jonah or Pinocchio, any of them. Any great mythological figure is correct for that fucking wonder. You know, goes outside, faces the chaos, finds value in the chaos, brings it back.
So maybe it's just the emphasis on the breaking of the existing structure in our society, because the progress myth has like
Well, of course it
the
is.
you
It's the
progress by
ideology map.
yeah, and that
Like yeah,
that doesn't
when we talked
exist
about
outside of
earlier.
progress to the same degree.
Yeah, exactly. What we talked about earlier was an ideology is half a map intentionally hidden. So it's the map and the story of the hero, of the rebellious leaving, the finding the value and bringing it back, but ignoring the
Hmm.
bringing it back part. Like, no, the rebellious hero is the person who is all rebellious and damaging as he leaves, which is always the case with these heroes, and goes and finds great value out there. Like they ignore the bringing it back part, and that's what makes it an ideology.
There's something else there too, though, that the idea of a hero who breaks out in some way, and I feel like there's differences in this in different cultures that I'm not aware of. Um, there's a different aspect to the hero in our modern culture compared to historically. Like if I'm just trying to think of ancient Greek and Hercules in as a sort of comparison, that their
Character
Hercules,
difference.
yeah, in the sense that like the myth of progress, and I'm deliberately using that terminology here. It's the idea that things started in a certain place, and through the striving of individuals who left behind what was broken or totalitarian or constricting. They broke the old pattern, made a new innovation, showed something, the Gutenberg Bible and the printing press, the computer, Alan Turing, so on. These are figures who did something new that changed the game, and then they were opposed by those who, uh, within the structure of the mythology, whose whose purpose is to fail. And the creationists play that part to a large degree in the sense of the no, your new innovation is wrong, it is this way. It is the way we've always said it is. And then the new innovator, the progress hero, the progressive, continues forging forward in a direction which looks straight in retrospect, but at the time is nothing like it. It's all over the place. It's who knows which direction of many it will take, because there are many innovators going out, and the one whose path is retrospectively defined as progress then becomes the hero. So there's many sources of gold that are found by many different explorers in many different directions. Like there are many good musicians who find something that makes sense to some people, but then there's one that gets big, and or there might be a few, but there's a very limited number who get to the top, and then they take 90% or 99% of the space, and that individual defines the path forward. Where I think older heroes, it's you go out as a person and find a person-sized bit of heroism. You slay your dragon and you bring back your gold and you get your girl. And it's not then you saved the nation, although at
It's
appropriate.
both.
Yeah, I'm just thinking William Wallace and Scottish cultural memory might be the right term, fighting against the English.
Or even further back in the ancient myths, it's saved the world through their actions.
In the
I
archetypal
think
form.
you I think you hit on the problem, which is the progressive idea. And I think that's where the poison in the well is, as far as the modern hero
Mm.
myth. Is they've slipped in this idea that history only goes one direction. That there's an end point, like there was a start point and there's an end point. And that end point is the only right one, and all the rest are wrong. And anyone who isn't progressing to that end point is evil, and a person who is progressing to that end point and bucking the system to do it is the hero.
It's almost like the mold gets, while you expand it on one front, you're closing it in on the opposite front.
Yeah,
Whereas,
it's saying that you don't get to define which things are gold. The hero is someone who goes out and finds gold that benefits our worldview and then brings it back. It's this idea of there is only ever going to be one end of history. I'm on the right side of history. And we're all progressing towards that, and that's what the hero does. And anyone who goes in any other direction is not a hero, they're a freak.
mm,
And we don't accept what they bring back.
and people
And
forget
then,
that
of
there
course,
have
it's,
been so many like that.
yeah, like obviously we could go in any different direction as a species, and you could judge whether which one are good or bad, but you can't say that history was always going to end at this political solution, which is always what it is, or cultural solution.
Or technological.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
and it's done that way, obviously, because then the next statement is, and we know which one it is, and we're right in
mm.
saying, which is the progressive line.
Yeah, like people dismiss the
We
idea
are
of
the heroes.
ancient advanced civilizations. Like, what if there
Yeah,
was a civilization a
for,
million
for
years
that
ago
reason.
that had a similar level of complexity to us, but in a way utterly different to anything we've conceived of, because it followed a totally independent route?
I'd love to go into that because I have some theories on that. And remember when we did our in-person have a drink episode, which
Yeah.
went up this week, I think. Um, that's what I wanted to talk about. I wanted to go in depth. I have a lot of completely wacky things and ideas that I've encountered, and I'd love to just have a shit talking episode where we just go through all of the stupid and ridiculous ideas that I have absolutely no basis and backup for, but still kind of want to be true. Um, obviously, I have some basis for all of them, but
Sort of a
you know,
list of this would be cool
I'm
as a book's ideas.
um, no, it's not even that. It's the I entertain this.
I
I'm very much a person who's, and I got this from an old mate of mine, which what a bastard, but I'm really glad that I got this from him, which is I'm not going to make a claim. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not going to say for certainty that I know a thing or know a thing to be false.
hmm.
Because even if it's 99% not likely, still 1%,
Hmm.
why would I claim that no, it's not the case?
Hmm.
I was also going to say before we close this out, which I think we should,
Mm.
that this is a conversation about being the archetype of the hero or the artist, really. And by temperament, the artist is a liberal, as you can imagine, the one who breaks the mold. And in this conversation, I realized that I am by temperament one of those people. And in describing how I do the not meeting in the middle, but the opposing, realizing that I get great satisfaction from breaking the mold to find gold in arguments, political or philosophical, and show it back to the group, which is the artist thing, which makes me liberal in temperament. But in our current society, my breaking the mold in that direction is to go in the direction of conservative or far right
Or
political persuasions or philosophy, or
anti-progress.
anti-liberal. Yeah, anti-progress or anti-liberal. That's the places that I always end up going to show the value.
So
that's the thing that is opposed to the society.
So you're technically liberal in terms of the breaking the mold, but you're
in terms of temperament. Yeah.
Or in terms of technical definition of the way you're acting, but in terms of your relationship to the officially accepted progress direction, you're going the opposite direction to that. So it's therefore rejected as old and
Yeah, I think about it, if I'm going to think about the mold, so say the mold is like in the middle of the Overton window, it's moving towards the liberal side of things. If you break out of the mold to the liberal side of things, where it's already going, you're not breaking the mold. You're just getting ahead of it. You're not counterculture if you're ahead of the culture. You're just the man of 2 generations from now. You're the future establishment.
I just had an image of the mold. It's the mold, as we're abstracting it, is constantly being rebuilt in its borders. In some areas, it's being withdrawn in because certain things move out of fashion. In other areas, it's stretched out. But if you try and move it along too fast, it breaks up. And then it's all chaos. And there's the sort of fragments of, well, we've got this bit and that bit and that bit, but it's not cohesive. And
I sort of see it as like a big cylinder column with these sort of wavy edges that can move in and out of stretch. And I see myself as like, I've jetted out to do the artist thing of like, hey, there's something valuable. By temperament, that makes me, liberal. And I've done the personality test. I'm kind of off the charts liberal. But I've gone in the direction of conservative as the rebellion, which I think is hilarious. I've always found this. It's like, I wanted to rebel against my culture so hard that I got married and had kids. And I am monogamous, and I found Jesus, and I shame all of the people who are doing bad behaviors. That's my rebellion.
Yeah.
Because it's the most rebellious thing I could do. Yeah. Literally. If it would be more socially acceptable for me to be a criminal where I come from.
That's weird.
But it's true.
Yeah. Just had another image that might work better. At least it seems to work better in my head of the mold as the walled garden, and then you can move the wall slowly by rebuilding it in that direction. Oh, we'll build it out a bit further in this direction towards where some new fertile ground was found, and we'll pull it in there because that ground seems to have been exhausted, and we'll leave that to chaos again. That's outside the wall. So inside the wall is the area of livable order, and outside the wall is the uncontained chaos or the unexplored chaos or whatever, and the wall's garden of society moves, but you can only build walls so fast, and so now there are gaps in the wall, and there are bits of garden, and there's gaps between the walls, between the segments of wall where chaos is getting in, and that.
Yeah, I see it as someone with a very powerful like engine It's
Mm.
put it on one side of the wall and it's just pushed.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like dragging the whole structure, and the walls are crumbling behind it as it's like banging on the ground as it's trying to go.
And then there's individuals who are just sitting down where they are, and then it
Yeah, and they're
looks,
getting run over by the wall.
unless they don't shift, and then the wall breaks on them.
Yeah. Oh, maybe I'm one of them.
Or the bit of the wall
Like,
that hits them stops because they're not moving. And then people are
yeah,
shouting them to stop impeding the progress of the wall.
yeah, and then the wall's gonna shatter. I'm not
Or,
gonna just go along with the society in a bad direction just to keep the society cohesive.
yeah, but the people who sit there and say,
Oh
no,
my
I'm
god,
going to
I'm
stand
gonna get
there.
put in a gulag. That's the exact kind of people that get put in gulags. That's comforting.
Ugh.
The ones who say, I'm not going along because I see where this is going and I won't let it go that far. That wall that's closing in is the prison gate.
I was seeing
It's
it
like, well,
as
fine.
the two segments of there end up being two segments of all, the one that's pushing forward and the one that sort of is left behind, then sort of closes up against the rest of the chaos, and then because it's being pushed so
That would
fast,
be
the other one
that would
breaks
be
apart.
nice.
That would be nice. That's a
That'd be
positive
nice.
outcome,
But
yeah.
I don't think that's how it works. I think you're likely just to get run over by the wall.
I
But hopefully you
wonder
can slow it down a bit.
I wonder if if it would be the case that the sooner you stand your ground and say, no, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to keep doing
Oh,
it this way, the sooner
it's
you
people
do
pushing.
that. Sorry?
The best analogy would be people pushing.
Pushing on the
There's
wall to
people
shift
at
it
the
out.
front pushing on the wall,
Mm,
pushing it in one direction, and there's people at the back trying to push it back. If you've
yeah,
got enough people, you're going to stop it moving.
yeah.
And eventually you have enough people that will stop it moving, and maybe you'll start moving it that way.
But also that it could break in half, and then if you wait till it's built up speed, you can't slow it down and stop it and reverse it. So then you get the gulags and you just get run over by it. But if you stop it
Yeah.
before then it's like, no, it started moving in a direction that's bad. I see where it's
Mm.
going. There's a cliff over there. Then you hold it back, and then those who are pushing hardest would sort of push off their own way and run off a cliff. If you're
Oh,
right
yeah.
that there is a
And
cliff
you snap the wall in half, the flood comes in.
there. But
We're surrounded by a floodwater.
where the existing foundation for the wall's garden is still strong, you can have a chance of protecting your piece of the garden from the flood.
Yes.
And
Yes,
where
because
they
you're
ran
still there.
off crazily, they're less likely.
But,
They're trying to run away from
but
water.
in order to do that, you have to build the wall around you again, which would, in this analogy, make you a separate nation.
Yes. Yes, it's
This
identifying
comes
yourself as
back.
separate from
Your
the other pushers.
your point of getting run over by the wall if you don't push soon enough. That comes back to why I wanted to do this in the first place.
Hmm.
Way back when I did the single rant videos, which are nowhere to be found. I still have them, by the way. I might one day, if we get all famous, and drop them as a thing. I'm never going to do that. I made the point, and I probably said it on here, which was that I'm scared to speak publicly because we live in a society that is getting totalitarian, which means there is danger to speaking publicly. And social ostracism and, you know, attacks on career or family, reputation destruction is the current weapon.
Hmm.
But I know full well that if I don't speak now and I wait until there's a knock at the door to take me away, then my speech won't matter then.
Hmm.
I have to do it now because if I don't, there will be a knock on the door and I will be dragged off by jackboot thugs. Because that's how this works. We're in the slide towards totalitarianism. And that's because people are saying things that aren't true. And people are shutting down those who say things that are true that are socially unacceptable.
Hmm. I was going to ask how you can, not saying you're wrong, but how can you say that it's headed in that direction?
Because I
And
read the Gulag Archipelago.
Yeah, yeah. It's on my list. I've got lots of books on my list, and I won't get to all of them. But the
It was
point
a bit
that,
traumatic.
yeah,
I read it twice in 1 week. I finished it and immediately started it again. I was just like, I can't leave this now.
yeah. The point you made immediately as I was about to say that because people aren't saying the truth, that yeah, it's like what is truth? Truth is an expression of what is that's consistent with what is. So the expression of what is matches what is within margin of error.
Oh, it's not even it's about corrupting.
Mm.
For a person to not say what they need to say when they need to say it, or to say something that they know to be false to get away with things, they're training themselves to do things that violate their conscience.
Mm.
You corrupt yourself once, you'll do it again and again and again, and you'll do it at an accelerated pace. And you become comfortable with doing that. And
Especially
that's
if
how
it has a
people go
reward.
from that's how people go from a standard society to beating their neighbors in the streets.
Mm.
That's how it happens. Informing on each other. That whole mess. Sending someone that you don't like off to the prison camps by saying one word to one political official that wasn't true.
Mm.
A society like that develops because people didn't say something when it would cost them nothing. And everyone thinks, well, I'll say something when it costs me everything. It's like, maybe you will. No one's going to listen.
Mm.
No one will say anything until it's their turn. And by the time it's your turn, it's too late. It's over. No one else is going to help you until it's their turn. So you either speak now and pay the minimal price of weird looks, or you don't, and you speak when they come to your door.
Mm.
But no one will listen, and they'll take you away anyway.
Mm.
And the likelihood, by the way, that you'll speak when they come to your door is also very little. Because if you corrupted yourself enough to still be surviving by the time that happens, you'll comply and you'll go with them willingly. Because everyone does.
Yeah.
Not to leave you on a depressing note, but that book will leave you on a depressing note. But it also tells you how to stop it happening, which is why I'm doing this.
Mm.
And why we're speaking in a public platform. And, today we made the statement of, some of the Nazi policies were good. And
Mm.
why we've been having this thing about sacred cows, which was you, by the way. Good job with that one. I agreed. I know. It's got to be done. Consequences of silence are worse than death.
Just thinking about the nature of truth, it's like we are limited individuals and we cannot, philosophically, it is impossible to absolute perceive the absolutely true nature of reality. Like that's philosophically impossible. And so this kind of best guess at reality discussion, this freedom of speech that we are engaging in, is essential to finding that truth because we're all feeling in the dark, and two people feeling in the dark together can navigate better than alone. And it's easy to think you've got it all worked out in your head, but as soon as you start to say it and have points challenged or queried, and then you've got to expand on them and so on, then you can work it out. Then you can find truth. You can't find truth on your own.
Well, it's like that argument that the conservatives and liberals always get into of like the truth versus my truth.
Mm.
Is that they've both got a point and they're talking past each other. But also both of them are so far off that they're also wrong in their own way.
Mm.
Half the picture. There is the truth. But we can't know it. We're not God. We don't know everything. It's all
Mm.
of that. And like you say, we have to feel out into the dark and not violate our conscience in an attempt to find the truth, which is, by the way, what the Holy Spirit is supposed to be. It's really annoying that all of Christianity forgot what Christianity is supposed to be about. The whole point of the religion was do not ever violate that goddamn spirit of truth. That's what they mean when the spirit told me. That's what the whole point was.
Yeah.
Never mind entire religion I'm annoyed with. And then the liberals are too far out on the other end because they don't accept the idea of some great truth, which is because they're atheists. So they say the thing of my truth. And what they mean by that is I get to define my own reality, not I will follow my own conscience.
Mm.
The answer is in the middle. Each of us has our truth, quote unquote, but what that means is following my best and honest, conscious spirit of truth to try and get close to the actual truth, which is, metaphysical and unknowable. So that's Father, Son, Holy Spirit, all that shit.
There's something I heard recently
And
about the principle of
mm,
Christ versus the person of Jesus. Jesus was a person, Christ is a principle,
yes,
which it's like
an archetype versus the person it was based on.
which came first is a whole another philosophical thing because
The archetype came first.
yeah.
It was just updated because he brought something new to the table.
Mm.
Um, I won't go too deep into that.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
there was
there's
another
a
point I was going to have.
sorry I
I
interrupted.
had some. No, you're right. I forgot it halfway through my thing, which I always do. I hate my memory. Mm.
If I recall correctly, Christ means truth, like true speech or true
Yeah,
word.
logos, which is the act of speaking aloud the conscious spirit of truth.
Hang on, so what's the
God is
relationship
supposed to
between those
be.
definitions?
God is supposed to be the divine incarnation of that. So he's the truth in absolute and unbounded.
Hmm.
Christ is the physical manifestation of it on earth. So he's what you're supposed to be. He's supposed to be the person who never sacrifices that spirit of truth to anything else. So he would, all other voices within his council of self are subservient to the spirit of truth, including his own, well-being and safety.
Hmm.
Almost like Socrates in his apology. And the spirit is the part of the council of me that is the manifestation of that element, the guiding principle. So it's that part of your conscience that calls you to speak the truth in the world.
Hmm.
And the idea is that that spirit, which is, so there's the 3-in-1 idea, which is at once the manifestation in an individual and the whole truth as, a metaphysical reality. That spirit is the thing that must be paramount and no other spirit matters, which is the monotheistic argument. All the other spirits not only are subservient, but are subservient to the point of not even worth being mentioned. Only listen to that one. That's why I am monotheistic, and that's why I like Christianity. Because I see all spirits as being needed to submit to that. Because I don't see spirits as, I don't primarily see them as literal metaphysical realities. I see them as the psychological spirits within us. because that's how they manifest to the individual. Whether they're a being out there is irrelevant. They're in me and in you and in every other human being, which what makes them a spirit beyond one person, so metaphysical. That's the part of them that matters because that's where it touches our lives. That's why I like that. And that's why I'm always been very hesitant to your polytheistic thing, because what it feels like to me is that A, that spirit is not paramount, and B, um, the which one is paramount at which time is more flexible and up to personal manipulation for personal gain, which is why I have issue with the which principle works at which time. So if it's interchangeable due to circumstances, then it's expedient and not a principle. Not that I live up to any of the things I claim. I'm flawed, and if the Christian religion is true in the creationist sense, then I'm going to hell. But I'd sooner listen to them than I would to other religions or polytheistic views, and certainly more than atheists. I guess we don't need the episode. I think I just made my best argument for me.
I'm just thinking that we, in a sense, in the polytheist versus monotheist argument, we're talking past each other a little bit.
Yeah, you seem to be very on the metaphysical plane of what is out there in the universe sense, right?
Yeah, more what is encountered rather than what's the best guiding principle structure.
Yeah, you're thinking of literal gods, whereas
Yes.
I'm not.
Yes.
Well, definition and terms. I don't agree with my own statement and what I just made, but I said it because that would be something you would agree with. I would use the word God or gods to apply to the thing that I said, but I know that's not what the word means to most people. I feel like I've just set off a time bomb. We were going to end this episode.
Yeah. We should do that. And
I see you jumping up and down in your chair like, oh, I got so much to say. I don't want to sit here for another hour.
I think I need to assess the difference between God, the idea of God as principle and God as entity, and contrast those with the definition of God used in the book I have that lays out an examination of the theology that comes from a polytheistic worldview.
Yeah, I have trouble seeing why they need to be separate.
And I don't have a good enunciation of it yet, but I do feel like they are separate. Let me think on that. How about we come back to that another time?
I think that's a good way to close it out.
Yep.
I think it's interesting how I keep doing this of just coming up with it on the spot. That goes back to what we were talking about when we started this, which was hopefully what we're trying to do is say things we've never said before. Because that's what generating something on the spot. I want the listeners, hello listeners, to actually hear a conversation in which things are discovered. Because that, for me, was a discovery of my own belief. I never articulated it before. It was all, there in pieces, but it takes a sentence like that to snap it together. And, hopefully if that's of value to other people, or at least entertaining. I'll settle for entertaining. Don't have to actually change the world if I can amuse people. Anyway, we should say good night.
Yep.
Unless you got closing arguments.
I'll come up with some closing arguments and present them in another one. Good night.
All right, another trial.